When you first step onto 2nd Street in Fall River, Massachusetts, the air feels deceptively ordinary. The neighborhood is quiet, the sidewalks lined with modest homes, the trees bending in the New England breeze, yet one house among them draws the eye. A pale square building that carries a weight of history heavier than bricks and timber. This is the Borden house, the site of one of America's most infamous murders, and today, a museum where past and present intertwine in unsettling ways. On the morning of August 4th, 1892, Andrew Borden and his wife, Abby, were found brutally murdered inside this very home. Their daughter, Lizzie, stood accused of the crime, though she was later acquitted in a trial that captivated the nation. Newspapers called it the trial of the century. The gruesome details: an axe swung repeatedly, a respectable family torn apart, the whispers of greed and resentment have never faded from public memory. More than a century later, visitors still come to this house, not just for history, but for something else. They come chasing the unease that clings to its walls, the chill that slides across the skin in the upstairs bedrooms, the subtle creaks on the staircase when no one is there. Guides recount how the house has become a magnet for ghost hunters and skeptics alike. Paranormal investigators report cold spots, flickering lights, and even the faint sound of a woman's sobs near the guest room, where Abby Borden's life was taken with merciless force. What makes this house so compelling is the duality it represents. It is both a carefully preserved historical site, with furniture arranged exactly as it was in 1892, and a stage for stories of the supernatural. Some visitors swear they feel the weight of unseen eyes watching them from dark corners. Others dismiss these tales as tricks of imagination, the mind bending under the gravity of the crime. But even skeptics admit there is something different about this place. Perhaps it is the knowledge of what occurred here, etched into memory and architecture alike, that unsettles the spirit. Or perhaps, as some whisper, the Borden family never truly left. This dual identity, the crime scene and the haunted house, is what draws us into the Borden case, not only as historians, but as seekers of truth. In this series, we will revisit the events of 1892, step by step, examining the crime, the trial, and the cultural impact that followed. But we will also walk these halls in their modern form, listening to the echoes of visitors who claim the past lingers here in more ways than one. Because the Borden house is not just about what happened. It is about what refuses to fade. The morning of August 4th, 1892, began like any other summer day in Fall River. The heat was already pressing in, a heavy New England humidity that clung to the walls of the Borden home. Andrew Borden, the patriarch, was a man of strict habits. Frugal to the point of severity, he refused to modernize his house with plumbing or electricity. Despite his fortune, his wife, Abby, lived under the strain of household resentments, aware that her stepdaughters, Lizzie and Emma, never truly accepted her. And Lizzie herself, 32 years old and unmarried, was restless, a woman hemmed in by expectations and whispered judgments. That morning, these currents of frustration and suspicion converged into something irreversible. Shortly after 9 a.m., Bridget Sullivan, the family maid, went about her chores, though she complained of illness from the summer heat. Abby instructed her to clean the windows, despite Bridget's protests. Upstairs, Abby made her way to the guest room to tidy it after a recent visitor's stay. What happened next is known only by the silent walls of that room. At some point between 9 a.m. and 10:30 a.m., she was attacked from behind. A sharp blade, most likely a hatchet, fell again and again. By the time her body was discovered, she had been struck 19 times. The brutality suggested not a stranger's quick violence, but something personal, deliberate. Downstairs, Andrew returned home after a morning of errands. He lay down on the sitting room sofa, weary from the heat. Minutes later, death found him too. Neighbors who gathered outside whispered in disbelief. 2 murders, within the same house, in the broad light of morning. The official reports present the facts with clinical precision. Times, wounds, and statements from those present. But the atmosphere inside the house was anything but clinical. Bridget, the maid, recalled feeling a dreadful heaviness in the air, as if the house itself knew what had been done. Later, visitors to the museum often point to the sitting room sofa and insist they still sense something there. A residual energy, a shadow that clings to the fabric of time. She reported that she had gone to the barn to look for iron fittings, and when she returned, she discovered her father's mutilated body. Her calm demeanor unsettled many. Others said shock had simply numbed her. Neighbors spoke of seeing her burn a dress in the days after the murders, an act she claimed was to destroy a garment stained with paint, but which prosecutors later suggested was blood. The investigation would unfold with startling speed, and the trial that followed would ignite fierce debates about gender, class, and justice in America. But that morning, before the headlines and the courtrooms, there was only a house in silence, interrupted by the echo of blows and the sudden stillness of death. To walk those rooms today is to straddle 2 realities: the documented crime and the enduring mystery. When the police first arrived at the Borden home on the morning of August 4th, 1892, they were met not only by the horror of what had occurred, but by an atmosphere of confusion and unease. The bodies of Andrew and Abby had already begun to draw curious neighbors to the street. Fall River was not accustomed to such savagery. A double murder committed in daylight inside the home of one of its wealthiest men demanded immediate answers. Yet from the very beginning, the investigation was clouded with contradictions. The Borden's maid, Bridget Sullivan, gave her account, trembling and pale, insisting she had been outside in the heat, trying to catch her breath when Lizzie called to her with the news of Andrew's death. Lizzie herself appeared strangely calm, offering explanations that satisfied few. She told officers she had been in the barn, seeking iron for fishing sinkers, and upon returning, she stumbled upon the gruesome scene. But detectives noted her clothing, immaculate, unstained, and her demeanor, unshaken, even detached. As hours turned into days, suspicion began to settle heavily upon Lizzie. No signs of forced entry were found. Nothing in the home had been stolen. Whoever had carried out the murders appeared to move freely through the house, comfortable within its walls. That fact narrowed the possibilities dramatically. The Bordens, though wealthy, lived in tension, and resentment had taken root deep within the family. On August 7th, just 3 days after the murders, investigators made a discovery that would shape public opinion. Witnesses recalled Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She explained it was ruined by paint, but the timing was damning. The trial, of course, was still months away. But inside the Borden home, the presence of investigators seemed to disturb more than dust. Officers later described an uncanny stillness in the rooms, as though the house itself resented their intrusion. Even decades later, museum staff have claimed that during quiet evenings, they hear the echo of footsteps, heavier than any tourist's tread, lingering in the guest room where Abby fell or near the sofa where Andrew breathed his last. The paradox of Lizzie Borden grew sharper with every headline. On the one hand, she was a respected churchgoer, a Sunday school teacher, the daughter of one of Fall River's most influential men. On the other, she was the only person who could have reasonably committed the crimes. The police found themselves facing a suspect who did not fit the mold. For to walk through its rooms even now is to sense the unresolved. Each chamber holds not just furniture and wallpaper from the 19th century, but the residue of doubt. It had become a stage upon which suspicion, fear, and the unseen would forever play their parts. By the summer of 1893, the Borden case had grown into a national obsession. Newspapers from Boston to San Francisco printed every rumor, every fragment of testimony, and every photograph that could be smuggled out of Fall River. Courtrooms were not only places of law, they had become theaters of spectacle. And in New Bedford, Massachusetts, where the trial was held, the proceedings were treated like the grandest drama of the age. The trial of Lizzie Borden lasted from June 5th to June 20th, and in those 2 weeks, the nation wrestled with a question that would echo far beyond the courtroom. Could a respectable woman of high society be capable of such unthinkable violence? They suggested a simmering resentment toward her father and stepmother, fueled by inheritance disputes and household conflicts. Their theory was simple. Lizzie alone had the motive, the opportunity, and the means. The defense, however, countered with equal force. They emphasized her standing in the community, her reputation as a dutiful daughter and church member. They pointed to the absence of physical evidence. No blood-stained clothing was ever conclusively tied to her, and the supposed murder weapon remained uncertain. Most importantly, they argued that the brutality of the crime was incompatible with the image of Lizzie Borden, a woman of refinement, constrained by the roles of her era. To imagine her raising an axe again and again was, they insisted, beyond reason. The courtroom atmosphere was electric. Reporters described Lizzie sitting pale and motionless, her eyes fixed on the floor, occasionally fanning herself in the stifling summer heat. Spectators crowded the gallery, craning for a glimpse of the accused. Supporters cheered, convinced of her innocence. Critics fumed, certain that wealth, gender, and privilege had shielded her from justice. But outside the walls of the courthouse, a different kind of trial continued. One carried out not by judges and juries, but by whispers and imaginations. The Borden house, preserved in the public mind as the scene of horror refused to fade. The acquittal may have freed Lizzie in the eyes of the law, but in the eyes of the public, the house itself remained a prisoner of suspicion. To this day, guides at the Borden Museum recount how many guests asked not about the trial's legal outcome, but about the strange sensations within its rooms. Did the jury's verdict settle the matter? Or did the house absorb the doubts of an entire nation, carrying them forward as restless energy? Each creak of the floorboards, each unexplained chill, seems to pose the question anew. After the gavel struck and the words, "Not guilty," echoed through the New Bedford courtroom, Lizzie Borden walked out a free woman. But freedom in the eyes of the law did not mean freedom in the eyes of society. If anything, her acquittal bound her more tightly to the crime than a conviction ever could. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. Former friends turned their backs. The Borden name, once synonymous with wealth and respectability, had become a brand of suspicion and horror. Newspapers had called her the woman with the axe. And though she had escaped prison, she could not escape that shadow. In 1897, Lizzie and Emma moved into a new home on French Street, which Lizzie christened Maplecroft. It was a grand house, far more luxurious than the modest Second Street residence where the murders had occurred. Lizzie filled it with fine furnishings, entertained guests, and sought to create an image of refinement and independence. Yet, no matter how elegant the walls of Maplecroft, the spectre of Second Street followed her. Children in Fall River sang the rhyme that still endures today. Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. When she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. The rhyme was inaccurate. Abby was struck 19 times, Andrew 11. But accuracy never mattered. What mattered was the power of myth. And Lizzie had become a character in a living ghost story. Her life after the trial was marked by a peculiar isolation. The details of their falling out were never disclosed, but rumor tied it to Lizzie's growing eccentricities, her defiance of social convention, and perhaps her lingering notoriety. Even in death, Lizzie remained bound to the crime. She died in 1927 at the age of 66 and was buried in the family plot beside her father and stepmother. For some, this was the final irony, that even in eternal rest, the Bordens could not be separated. Visitors to the Oak Grove Cemetery still pause at the Borden graves, tracing their fingers over the names, whispering the rhyme, and wondering whether the truth lies beneath the soil or lingers in the air of Second Street. Meanwhile, the old Borden house itself aged into legend. For decades, it remained a private residence, its walls containing the ordinary lives of those who came after. But no owner could entirely erase its history. Neighbors spoke of flickering lights when the house was empty, of cries heard late at night. Children dared each other to touch the door and run, convinced the ghosts of Andrew and Abby still waited inside. When the house was eventually opened as a bed and breakfast museum in the late 20th century, its transformation felt inevitable. Tourists arrived not only to learn about the crime, but to feel the chill of its haunting. The Borden home had transcended its status as a crime scene. It had become a stage for America's fascination with the intersection of murder, myth, and the supernatural. Lizzie's acquittal may have closed the trial, but it never closed the case. And so the question remains, was she truly innocent? Or did she live the rest of her life in freedom, while the house itself bore the sentence? Today, more than a century after the murders, the Borden house stands not merely as a preserved Victorian residence, but as one of the most infamous haunted museums in America. What was once a private home now operates as a bed and breakfast and historical tour, drawing thousands each year who come to walk the rooms where blood once spilled, and where many believe spirits still linger. The experience of stepping inside the house is unsettling from the beginning. Guides greet visitors in period costume, reciting the events of that August morning in chilling detail. The rooms are furnished as they were in 1892. The sitting room with its sofa, where Andrew was slain. The guest bedroom, where Abby met her end. The kitchen stove, where Lizzie allegedly burned her dress. To some, it feels like a faithful reconstruction of history. To others, it feels like entering a place that resists time, as though the past never truly departed. Lights flicker inexplicably, and cameras malfunction in rooms most associated with violence. In the guest room, some claim they see a shadow crossing the wall at night, moving slowly as if reenacting Abby's final steps. Others speak of a heavy pressure on the chest, a sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. One of the most commonly told stories is of footsteps on the staircase. Late at night, when the house is otherwise silent, the sound of boots creaking upward has been heard by both staff and guests. Investigators who have set up audio recorders claim to have captured faint whispers, sometimes a woman's voice, sometimes a man's low murmur. Skeptics argue these are drafts, noises from the old wood, or tricks of the imagination. But those who have experienced them firsthand insist the sounds are too deliberate, too personal to dismiss. Others report an unshakable sense of dread, as though they are about to witness the crime unfold again. A few have even described hearing the faint squeak of couch springs, identical to the testimony of investigators in 1892 who first documented Andrew's body lying there. Paranormal researchers often speak of residual hauntings, where emotion is so intense that it imprints on a location. If that is true anywhere, they argue, it is true here. The notoriety of the Borden house has drawn television crews from around the world. Programs such as Ghost Adventures and Kindred Spirits have staged overnight investigations, producing footage of unexplained knocks, electromagnetic spikes, and eerie voices on spirit boxes. You can walk through the rooms as a historian, studying artifacts and transcripts, or you can walk through as a seeker of the uncanny, listening for voices in the walls. Either way, you confront the same reality. This house is more than wooden plaster. It is a place where history and legend blur, where justice remains unresolved, and where many believe the dead are not silent. The trial of the century did not resolve the Borden mystery. Instead, it amplified it, and in the silence of the house, one can almost imagine the echo of the jury's words. Not guilty. A verdict that freed a woman, but condemned a home to eternal speculation. What happened inside the Borden home transcended the boundaries of true crime and entered the realm of American folklore, preserved and retold through generations in countless forms. Almost immediately after the trial, newspapers and pulp writers seized on the drama. They painted Lizzie alternately as a tragic heroine or a cunning villain, a woman who embodied the contradictions of her time. The nursery rhyme that immortalized her name spread across schoolyards, embedding itself into the childhood of generations who had never set foot in Fall River. That simple verse ensured that Lizzie's story could never truly fade. By the mid-20th century, the legend of Lizzie Borden had taken on a second life in popular culture. Her tale appeared in radio dramas, crime anthologies, and eventually film and television. In 1975, the made-for-TV movie The Legend of Lizzie Borden, starring Elizabeth Montgomery, captivated audiences by dramatizing the murders with unsettling intimacy. Viewers were left to decide for themselves whether Lizzie was guilty or innocent. But the haunting imagery ensured that the case remained vivid in the public imagination. Later, television revisited the case again with Lizzie Borden Took an Axe, 2014, and the limited series The Lizzie Borden Chronicles, 2015. These productions leaned heavily into the gothic and the supernatural, portraying Lizzie not just as a woman accused, but as a figure almost mythic, half human, half ghost, forever shadowed by the axe. Critics debated whether these portrayals sensationalized tragedy, but their success confirmed the enduring grip of the story. Even today, crime writers and historians continue to publish new works on the subject, each seeking to crack a mystery that has resisted closure for more than a century. And then there are the ghost shows, the countless episodes of Ghost Adventures, Most Haunted, and independent documentaries that descend upon the Borden house with cameras and infrared scanners. These productions have given the case a modern afterlife, recasting it not just as a question of guilt, but as an ongoing haunting. They highlight the flickering lights, the phantom footsteps, the EVP recordings of whispers that seem to answer when investigators call out Lizzie's name. Whether one believes or not, these broadcasts expand the Borden myth into a worldwide phenomenon, ensuring the house remains both a crime scene and a stage for the supernatural. The impact is visible even in music and theater. Punk bands have written songs about Lizzie, artists have painted her portrait with an axe in hand, and performance troupes stage plays that reinterpret her as a feminist icon, a victim of patriarchal oppression, or a monster of her own making. Each retelling reflects less on the facts of the crime and more on the anxieties of the society retelling it. What binds all of these cultural echoes together is the enduring allure of ambiguity. Lizzie Borden is not remembered as definitively guilty or innocent. To cross its threshold is to step into a story that refuses to die. A tale told not just through artifacts, but through sensations and whispers that no guidebook can explain. Guest logs from the bed and breakfast reveal countless entries that blur the line between tourism and testimony. Some guests describe their nights as quiet and uneventful, though the weight of history pressed on their minds. Others recount experiences so chilling they left before dawn. In the pages of those logs, one finds phrases like, "Woke up to someone breathing in my ear," or "Heard a woman crying in the hallway at 3 a.m. These are not the exaggerated claims of television crews, but the raw impressions of ordinary people who paid for a night in a haunted house and received more than they expected. One of the most widely shared stories comes from a group of college students who stayed in the guest room where Abby Borden was murdered. Around midnight, one of them reported seeing a dark figure standing near the bed. When she turned on the lamp, the figure vanished, leaving only the faint smell of lavender, the very scent Abby was said to have favored. Her companions corroborated the account, and though skeptics dismiss it as suggestion, the story has been retold by guides for years. A few claim that photographs taken in the room show distortions, pale streaks of light, or misty forms hovering near the sofa. While none of these images serve as definitive proof, they have circulated widely online, fueling the house's reputation as one of the most haunted places in New England. Paranormal investigators who spend the night often employ modern tools, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and digital recorders. During one investigation, a team captured a series of knocks, responding in pattern to their questions. When asked, "Lizzie, are you here?" 3 distinct knocks echoed through the house. Later, a faint female voice was allegedly recorded whispering, "I didn't." To believers, it was Lizzie herself proclaiming her innocence more than a century after the fact. Not all reports are so direct. Even skeptics admit that the atmosphere of the house is unusual. Psychologists suggest that the combination of history, expectation, and suggestion can produce powerful experiences that feel real. Yet this explanation fails to account for the consistency of the reports. Different visitors across decades describe the same phenomena in the same rooms. Coincidence or something more? What makes these stories compelling is not whether they can be proven, but how they mirror the unresolved nature of the case itself. Just as the trial ended without a definitive answer, the house offers no certainty. Instead, it offers questions in the form of footsteps, whispers, and shadows that vanish when the light returns. To walk through the Borden house is to participate in its haunting, whether one believes in ghosts or not. Each visitor adds their own perception, their own fear, their own doubt, and in this way, the legend continues to grow, not through verdicts or evidence, but through the lived experience of those who dare to spend a night in a house where the past refuses to rest. Even after decades of retelling, the Borden case remains one of the most perplexing puzzles in American criminal history. At its heart lies a series of forensic questions, unsettled in 1892 and still debated today, that keep the story alive. The physical evidence, though examined by investigators of the era, never fully coalesced into certainty. Police recovered several hatchets and axes from the Borden property, but none could be definitively proven to have been used. One small hatchet head, found without its handle, became the prosecution's favorite. They argued that the missing handle had been deliberately destroyed to conceal bloodstains. Yet no handle was ever located, and modern analysts question whether that blade could have inflicted the precise wounds described in the autopsy. Then, there is the matter of blood evidence, or rather, the lack of it. The killer would have had to swing a blade repeatedly, striking with brutal force. Bridget testified that she had been outside for part of the morning, ill from the heat, while Lizzie claimed she was in the barn. But investigators found little dust disturbed in the barn loft, casting doubt on her story. Perhaps the most haunting forensic question concerns Lizzie's burned dress. Multiple neighbors testified to seeing her destroy a garment in the days after the murders. Lizzie explained it was ruined by paint, but prosecutors insisted it was stained with blood. Unfortunately, the dress was gone, leaving only speculation. DNA could have settled questions of blood, fibers, and hair. Advanced luminol testing might have revealed hidden traces in the house, and it is in that ambiguity that the legend thrives. Each unsolved detail invites theory after theory. Was Lizzie a cunning murderer who meticulously planned her crime? Was she an innocent woman condemned by rumor and prejudice? Or was there another figure, someone overlooked, someone who slipped in and out, leaving the house to shoulder the blame? Visitors to the Borden Museum often linger longest in the guest room and the sitting room, where the forensic puzzles are most palpable. Guides point to the spot where Abby fell, the precise angle of the blows, the bloodstains described in 1892 reports. They encourage guests to imagine the mechanics of the crime, to picture the unseen assailant raising the blade. In doing so, the museum transforms from a relic of history into a laboratory of speculation, where each visitor becomes an investigator, wrestling with evidence that will never yield a final answer. The lack of closure is perhaps the most powerful force of all. The Borden case is not remembered because it was solved. It is remembered because it was not. What kind of person could commit such a crime? Was Lizzie a cold-blooded murderer, or the innocent victim of a society that could not comprehend her independence? To some criminologists, Lizzie's profile defies easy classification. She was not the typical suspect. A woman of 32, unmarried but financially comfortable, raised in the rigid social world of New England's upper middle class. She taught Sunday school, participated in church activities, and was considered a woman of refinement. And yet, her relationships within the family were strained. Accounts suggest that she resented her stepmother Abby, believing she married Andrew for wealth rather than love. In an era when women's lives were strictly controlled, confined to domestic roles, denied independence, her existence at age 32, unmarried and still dependent on her father, may have felt like a cage. Psychologists describe such a state as bottled rage, anger turned inward until it erupts. The savagery of the attacks, the sheer number of blows, suggests not random violence, but fury unleashed. Others see Lizzie's composure after the murders as suspicious. Witnesses described her calmness as unnatural, almost clinical. Could it have been shock? Or was it the demeanor of someone who had meticulously prepared herself? When neighbors whispered that she burned a dress, psychologists read it as evidence of guilt, the destruction of incriminating evidence. But defenders argue the opposite, that her calm was a sign of innocence, and that her lack of hysteria reflected strength rather than guilt. Gender plays a crucial role in the analysis. In 1892, the idea of a genteel woman committing such brutality was nearly unthinkable. Many historians argue that Lizzie's acquittal stemmed less from evidence than from disbelief. The jury could not imagine a woman of her class wielding a hatchet in cold blood. No story of the Bordens is complete without Emma, Lizzie's older sister. At 41 during the trial, Emma played a quieter role, overshadowed by Lizzie's notoriety. Yet their relationship, complicated, strained, and ultimately severed, remains one of the enduring enigmas of the case. Emma and Lizzie shared a difficult household. Their father's strict frugality denied them many comforts, and their dislike for Abby created a bond of resentment. During the trial, Emma stood by Lizzie, offering support when much of Fall River turned away. She testified in her defense, affirming Lizzie's good character. For years afterward, the sisters lived together in Maplecroft, united by both blood and the stigma of suspicion. But in 1905, something fractured. Emma left Maplecroft suddenly and never returned. Historians speculate endlessly about the cause. Some believe it was a quarrel over money or inheritance. The estrangement was permanent. Lizzie and Emma never reconciled, not even in Lizzie's final illness. The house itself seems to echo this division. Paranormal investigators report that voices captured in the home sometimes sound like two women in argument. Sharp, whispered tones, as though replaying an old quarrel. Whether coincidence or spectral reenactment, the image of two sisters forever divided has become part of the legend. Emma's story reminds us that the Borden case was not only about murder, but about family. A family eroded by tension, silences, and secrets. In the end, the Borden's legacy was not just bloodshed, but estrangement. A house once filled with kinship transformed into a monument of division. To fully understand why the Borden murders captivated the nation, one must consider the society of late 19th century America. Fall River in 1892 was a booming industrial town, its mills churning with textile wealth. Yet beneath prosperity lay sharp divides of class, gender, and morality, all of which the Borden case exposed like a wound. The Gilded Age was an era of contradictions, staggering wealth alongside grinding poverty, strict Victorian morality clashing with rising calls for women's independence. Newspapers thrived on sensationalism, feeding a public appetite for scandal. Andrew Borden was a figure of financial discipline, emblematic of New England values. His murder within his own home symbolized an attack not just on a family, but on the very ideals of order and stability. To accuse his daughter Lizzie, a church-going woman of social standing, was to challenge Victorian beliefs about femininity, morality, and the sanctity of the household. The press amplified every detail. Illustrations of the crime scene filled front pages. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, transmitting daily updates to a hungry public. Others argued the opposite, that her trial showed how easily women could be trapped by prejudice and denied fairness. Thus the case became entangled in larger debates about gender, law, and justice. Even the supernatural undertones, whispers of curses, hauntings, and bad omens, fit into the culture of the time. Spiritualism was flourishing in the late 1800s, with seances and ghost stories popular across America. The idea that the Borden house might be haunted by its victims resonated deeply with an audience attuned to the unseen. In this context, the Borden murders were not merely a local tragedy. Alternative theories. Could it have been someone else? Though Lizzie Borden has always stood at the center of suspicion, she was not the only theory investigators or historians have entertained. The Borden home was near a busy street, and doors were sometimes left unlocked during the day. Could a vagrant or enemy have slipped inside, committed the murders, and escaped? Yet the lack of theft argued against it, and investigators struggled to imagine such a killer moving unseen. A more intriguing theory revolved around business enemies of Andrew Borden. As a wealthy man in a competitive town, he was not without rivals. And then there were the darker whispers that Lizzie and Bridget conspired together, or that Emma knew more than she ever revealed. None of these theories have withstood close scrutiny, yet their persistence speaks to the enduring hunger for answers. In the absence of certainty, every shadow becomes a suspect, every silence a possible confession. Modern forensic re-examinations. Over the years, criminologists and forensic experts have returned to the Borden case, attempting to apply modern science to old questions. While no physical evidence survives that could be tested with DNA, the reports and photographs remain, inviting fresh analysis. Blood spatter experts argue that the killer must have been close enough to be stained, making Lizzie's spotless clothing a puzzle. Some suggest she may have killed unclothed, cleaning herself before donning fresh garments. An unsettling but plausible scenario. Others argue that forensic contamination in 1892 may have obscured evidence. Psychological profilers point to the overkill, multiple blows beyond necessity, as a classic sign of personal rage. If the killer were a stranger, fewer strikes would have sufficed. This suggests someone emotionally tied to the victims. Reenactments in laboratories have attempted to measure timelines. How long it would take to kill Abby upstairs, clean up, and then strike Andrew downstairs. Results vary, but most agree the window of opportunity was narrow, pointing once again to someone with free access to the house. Despite these insights, the case remains unsolvable. Modern experts admit that without DNA, the smoking gun will never exist. The Borden murders occupy a peculiar place in criminology. A case too old for science to resolve, too famous to forget. Lizzie Borden has become more than a figure in crime history. She is a cultural icon. Her name surfaces in songs, plays, novels, and even Halloween costumes. She embodies both horror and fascination, a duality that ensures her legend endures. In classrooms, her trial is taught as an example of gender bias in the legal system. In criminology, her case is cited as an early example of public obsession with true crime. In literature, she inspires stories about repressed rage and hidden violence. American pop culture thrives on ambiguity, and Lizzie provides it in abundance. She's guilty to some, innocent to others, and spectral to all. Her story reflects the anxieties of her time, about women's roles, about domestic violence, about the fragility of respectability. And those anxieties remain resonant today. The rhyme alone ensures immortality. Children still chant it without always knowing its origin, passing on the name Lizzie Borden as if it were folklore. And in a way it is. She has transcended history to become myth, a ghost that haunts not only Fall River, but the American imagination itself. The Borden house today is more than a museum. It is a palimpsest of memory. Each visitor brings their own expectations, their own fears, layering new impressions atop old ones. The house absorbs them, becoming heavier with each telling. Guides describe it as a place where history never left. The furniture, the wallpaper, even the creaking floors seem frozen in 1892. Yet it is not just preservation, it is performance. The house plays its role as crime scene and haunted relic, blurring fact and legend. For the people of Fall River, it is both burden and attraction. Some resent the notoriety, wishing the town could move beyond its dark claim to fame. Others embrace it, seeing in the house a source of tourism, curiosity, and cultural identity. Either way, the house endures, a monument to unresolved truth. Visitors who stay overnight often leave with the sense that they have not simply toured history, but participated in it. The house seems to demand acknowledgement of its secrets, even if those secrets can never be proven. What makes the Borden case endure is not its answers, but its questions. Every theory leaves gaps. Every explanation raises further doubts. The absence of closure becomes its own form of truth. For criminologists, it is a study in ambiguity. For paranormal enthusiasts, it is proof that violence leaves echoes. For ordinary visitors, it is a story that resists fading, as alive now as it was in 1892. Perhaps this is why the Borden rhyme still echoes on playgrounds, why the house remains booked for tours, why scholars and storytellers return again and again. The mystery is not a flaw, it is the essence. To speak of Lizzie Borden today is to speak of America itself, its fascination with crime, its hunger for spectacle, its uneasy dance with the supernatural. The Borden case anticipated the modern obsession with true crime, blending fact, fear, and folklore. In every retelling, the story changes slightly, reflecting the concerns of the era. In 1892, it was about gender and morality. In the 1970s, it was about rebellion and hidden darkness. In the 21st century, it is about trauma, psychology, and the persistence of ghosts. The Borden House is not just a place in Fall River. It is a symbol. It tells us that some truths resist resolution, and that in that resistance lies power. The Borden murders remain unsolved. Lizzie's innocence or guilt will never be known with certainty. But perhaps certainty was never the point. The true legacy of the case lies in the interplay of history and haunting. The Borden House stands as a reminder that violence does not end with death, that it lingers, shaping memory, culture, and imagination. To step inside is to feel that lingering. To study the case is to join generations of searchers, each convinced they might glimpse the truth. But the house resists final answers, just as Lizzie resisted conviction. And so, the story endures, not as a solved puzzle, but as an echo, a whisper in the hallway, a shadow on the stairs, a verdict forever suspended. The Borden House does not offer closure. It offers something more enduring, a haunting